Welcome to the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Louisville attorney Jim Desmond has been handling injury cases related to traffic accidents for over 20 years. Jim will provide valuable information to help you and your family. He wants you to understand the important issues you need to know when it comes to handling car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. There's a lot riding on this, so let's get started. All right, welcome back. Jim Desmond, welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to talk about motorcycle riders and COVID-19. It's interesting anecdotal evidence that we're looking at right now. Let's stress that it's anecdotal, but it's kind of common sense. With the weather finally changing, with people dealing with cabin fever, people want to get out on the roads, and part of those guys are going to be actually motorcycle riders, and that's going to lead to some problems for a number of them.
Right. I mean, and Jim, you and I recently talked about a whole podcast on motorcycles, but we wanted to come back to it because of that. I think you agree with me that we both have seen more motorcycle riders on the road in general with the spring hitting and this, and the lockdown from the COVID. The biggest concern I still have, and again, we haven't seen the total effect from all this, but one reason I said I want to talk again about motorcycles is the fact that I think we're going to see more drivers out there without insurance or without enough insurance. Because, again, if you think about it, we don't know where the whole thing is going to end up with COVID, okay? We know, from what I'm hearing, it's going to at least be a recession and possibly worse, okay? So if people have been off work, what are they going to do, basically, to get by? Then one of the first things they're going to do is unfortunately, drive illegally and drop your car insurance, or to lessen the amount of the coverage. And the problem with a motorcycle is, again, more than anything else, is that if you get rear-ended by a Prius and I'm in my Honda, okay, not great, but not going to be horrendous. I'm not going to have surgeries and stuff involved, most likely. In contrast to Prius rear ends, a Harley Davidson, and you might have a leg surgery and a $40,000 or $50,000 bill, and now you have a Prius that has no insurance or not enough insurance because, again, they've taken a look at all this and they've lowered their coverage. Their
policies, yeah.
Right. And part of it, too, I mean, if you think about it, it makes total sense because even the insurance companies have been refunding some of their premiums because, again, we've been driving less. And so people in general are sitting here saying, well, I don't really need all this coverage because I'm not using it and I'm not using my vehicle as much, and I'm not as much at risk, which there is some truth to all that. But again, it goes back to the crux of what we've talked about through all these podcasts, which is, you have to protect yourself from the potential the other driver has no insurance or not enough insurance. And that applies to whether it's a motorcycle policy or an automobile policy.
Well, and we talked about that in that episode, that motorcycle coverages are treated differently. They're viewed differently in that, Kentucky has a no-fault policy, or it's a no-fault state, meaning there's some money there that's automatically available for someone in a car that motorcycle drivers not really going to have access to.
Right. Well, they don't have it at all, period. Yeah. Okay. There's three coverages that protect you, okay, as an operator of a motor vehicle, okay, and that is no-fault coverage, which means your medical bills are covered by the vehicle you're in up to $10,000 immediately. Medical bills, lost wages, some other elements. Uninsured, which means the guy has no insurance. Your company acts like they insure that other driver, okay. Underinsured, they didn't have enough insurance. Again, we can recover what we can from the at-fault driver and then go against your company to potentially recover more. The thing about being on a motorcycle is no fault is not automatic. In fact, they penalize a motorcyclist right off the bat. So I had another attorney call me about this the other day, very competent attorney, don't get me wrong, but motorcycles are kind of a niche area of the law.
Yep.
And the question was, can either the operator or the rider, the passenger of the motorcycle get PIP coverage? And the answer is no, typically. Okay, neither one is entitled to this no fault or PIP coverage. Same thing. So again, how do you get those bills paid? You've got to use your health insurance, the health insurance of the motorcyclist or their passenger. The law goes on. And this is the part that I've said is unfair from day one, and it still has existed since the Motor Vehicle Act was passed back in, I think, 76. The motorcyclist driver cannot recover the first $10,000 of their medical bills. They treat them as if they're uninsured, which is unfair, okay? But that's how the law does. So again, if you have $15,000 in medical bills and that Prius was at fault for the wreck, that Prius is looking at your claim for pain and suffering and 5,000 of your medical bills, not 15. In contrast, the passenger cannot recover the no-fault insurance, but they can recover all of their medical bills. They can recover the full $15,000 from that fault driver. So, and there's about 2 or 3 statutes that come into play on that you have to look at and kind of read them, together to get that. But again, being on a motorcycle is more dangerous than the average vehicle, unfortunately, and that's how the law looks at it. One of the biggest things I always stress to people, again, is that you cannot, if you ride a motorcycle, you cannot assume any aspect of your automobile insurance will apply while you're riding that motorcycle.
Well, we've talked about exclusions that often apply if you have a normal automobile policy and you think your bike's covered. There's often an exclusion in there, buried down in there, that you may not realize.
Right. And don't get me wrong, if we have a serious, my motorcycle clients have always kind of looked at me a little strange with this, but if we have a serious motorcycle wreck, I will go back and I will fish. And what I mean by fishing is I will go say, give me every auto insurance, RV, whatever boat policy you got. I'm going to see if I can make something apply because the damages are huge and insurance coverage right now is limited. So we'll go back and try to make those apply. But one, it's not, as you just said, there's usually an exclusion for motorcycles. It's very, very, very common for automobile policies to have that, and they're not going to apply. Or two, we may have to be doing some fancy reading and some fancy arguing to try to get around that exclusion. So it's not where you want to go. I always say when I do most of my hospital calls, a hospital call where I actually go down and meet with a client while they're still hospitalized, I always say most of them tend to be motorcyclists, but it tends to be like the doctor where you're going in for plastic surgery. And I'm sitting here giving that injured motorcyclist 100 different scenarios that can happen because I don't know how much his insurance is on what policy, how much the other driver's insured for, what his total medical bills are going to be, or anything like that.
There's just too many unknowns at that point.
Right. And I always say to my clients, every single one of my clients, whether they're on a motorcycle or an automobile policy, they've heard me preach and say, look, uninsured, underinsured coverage on any automobile or motorcycle policy you have of at least $100,000 per person. And the reason I do that is I say, look, if you are ever in that scenario where you're calling me and I'm coming down for that hospital and we're talking, if you've done that, I'll tell you, I don't care about all those other issues. I know you'll be okay. I know you've given me the tools to work with where I can make it so you get out of this thing okay. Because again, we talked about this in the prior podcast. I'm not trying to get people rich through lottery tickets. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to keep people, especially motorcyclists, because they tend to be severely injured, from going backwards for a car wreck or a motorcycle accident that was not their fault. And going backwards meaning incurring, lost wages and medical bills and copays that basically they wouldn't have had to incur otherwise, but because somebody wasn't paying attention, that they now have to deal with, and much less the treatment and the scarring and the rehab for the next 6 months to a year.
Right, for something that again wasn't their fault, and that's where these different kinds of insurance policies, those coverages, really make sense, especially on a motorcycle, because again the base coverage that you have on a car is not there, that PIP coverage. So again, increasing the UM or UIM coverage makes a lot of sense because that is a nice little umbrella to have in terms of it can add some additional, because with COVID right now, with people getting laid off and everything, as you said from the outset, a lot of these insurance policies are either reduced now, meaning that the policy holders calling in and saying, hey, how can I get my bill down? Or it's lapsed because maybe they're out of work. Maybe this is something that they've just got to do to be able to make sure they have food on the table. Well, you deserve that right as well.
Right, and that's because, and if you think about something,
sorry to get a little preachy there, but I mean that's the reality of it. You deserve that right as well.
And that's the thing is the advice I'm giving is for 5% of the accidents that are out there. Okay, not 95%. 95% will be the little fender bender, which is great. But the problem is if you're ever the victim of the 5%, then you're sitting there saying, "Oh hell, what's going on? How do we get out of this?" I always say, and you've heard me say this before, Jim, and the COVID has really kind of illustrated it. We go along, every day and we start planning. We have our savings account, we have our retirement account, we have our life insurance, our disability insurance, all these things designed to plan to kind of go forward with and make sure if things go wrong. Well, the COVID-19 virus just took all that and threw us a big wrench where none of us ever expected to be at home or in quarantine or anything like that. Well, the same analogy is to like a severe motorcycle accident, which is, again, you're taking your motorcycle out for a ride. You're expecting to be back in an hour after, a leisurely ride. And all of a sudden you're in the hospital for 2 weeks and you got a $100,000 medical bill.
Right.
That's what you want to be prepared for. And are the odds against that happening? Yes, thank God. But if they do, you want to be prepared. I always think that one reason I feel like I've done pretty decently on some issues in life is that, I always try to get ready for the worst case scenario, because if you can handle the worst case scenario, you can pretty much handle most things in life. So yeah, the motorcyclists especially. I personally don't ride. I've been very enticed and very tempted sometimes to get a motorcycle. And it's nothing against the motorcycle rider, because most of my clients have been riding for years. They're very well experienced. They ride with the right protective gear and everything else. It's that I've seen accidents happen because somebody else wasn't paying attention, running a red light, pushing a yellow, looking, texting, or whatever else. And that motorcyclist is all of a sudden sitting here saying, I'm being called by Safe Auto and I'm being told there's $25,000 of insurance coverage and I'm still in the hospital. What the hell is going on?
Yeah.
And that's what I want you to be ready for. And that's why, you said about something you said earlier about being preachy. I tend to be very preachy on this. And that's because I've had so many cases, more motorcycles than anything else, where the coverage does not match the damages.
Right.
And again, it's most of my clients on motorcycles, it's not been, I can't say to them, oh, this is fair or anything else, because it's not been, their out-of-pockets have been so substantial that it really has pained me to the point where I remember one I was thinking right off the bat, where I pulled in 3 other attorneys. I didn't pull them in officially, but we sat down one day, took them all out to dinner, and I said, show me where I'm doing something wrong. Take this case over from me. Because it bothered me that my client was going to recover so little. But unfortunately, nobody could tell me we were doing it wrong. And that's the facts of the matter, which is, again, go back to something from the beginning that I've preached on all these podcasts. And I even used this analogy, I know the last one, back to the computers, garbage in, garbage out. Well, but when that accident happens, it's like a photograph is taken. Everything that's in that photograph stays there. You can't put anything in. You can't pull anything out. Well, what I'm preaching to you, and don't get me wrong, I'm well aware we have naysayers and people have personal injury claims, they don't like it, this or that. Whatever. It doesn't bother me, okay? What I'm preaching to you about this uninsured and underinsured coverage applies whether it's me, another personal injury attorney in town, whether you think you're smart enough to handle it on your own, it doesn't matter, okay? You can go to an insurance company, and if they're not telling you to do this, then they're really selling you a little short to just get you in there and get you this lower premium, because that's how they sell it. That's how they all talk about their cost savings,
right,
okay?
Right.
Because this stuff doesn't get used that much. But again, if you have this kind of coverage and you ever need it, you'll say, thank God. And unfortunately, most of my clients who have this kind of coverage, when I've seen this and I see a great insurance policy come in, 2 things. One, usually it's on the second case, and I say, why do you have it? Why do you have this kind of coverage? Who talked to you? And they're like, oh, no, we already had a prior accident. And that's where we learned our lesson.
You had to learn the hard way.
And then 2, unfortunately, the circumstances 9 out of 10 times are the accident, you don't need that coverage, is the one you have it on.
Exactly.
So it's I just ranted on you a little bit because I do preach on that, because it does bother me. It because again, people want to go out and say, I want to pay less for car insurance premiums, and I get it. I'm paying a ridiculous amount right now because I've got a 20-year-old driver on my policy. But again, I don't want to take a chance that some drunk driver or some distracted teenager or whatever, causes a severe accident, and any of us are sitting here dealing with rehab and everything else and trying to, recover from that, incur medical bills and stuff that we didn't plan on, we didn't budget for.
Well, in the unfortunate fact, and a lot of people kind of overlook this, is that it's not about the amount of damages sustained, it's about the amount of coverage available.
Correct.
And that's the thing that really people, until they're in that situation, don't realize how unfair that can be. And when you're talking about a motorcycle rider or a motorcycle rider and passenger, those injuries are going to be oftentimes severe, maybe catastrophic, maybe life-ending.
Well,
and it's a shame, but unfortunately, it's about the available coverage.
What you're hitting on is something we covered in the prior podcast, which is, and it's worth repeating, is the common misconception is that the other guy's at fault for the wreck. He owes me my medical bills and more. All right, he's responsible. Well, that's not the case. That's not how the law is set up.
And I think that's right there. That's what surprises people.
Well, and I tell my clients, I say, unfortunately, first concept, get rid of the idea that the law is fair. Okay, it endeavors to be fair, it doesn't succeed. But that's the problem is the state minimum in Kentucky is $25,000 in insurance coverage. Same thing in Indiana. Every state can be different. I think it was a Maryland policy I just dealt with is $30,000, but like Florida, I think is $15,000 or less.
Wow.
Okay, so again, it's one of those that. How do you protect yourself? Because what the law is telling you is, no, I'm not going to give you any guarantee this other guy has enough insurance coverage to cover your medical bills. So you say, okay, well, Desmond, you've said I can sue somebody for however much I want. Absolutely. Okay. I can sue somebody and get a piece of paper that says they owe you $500,000, in a car wreck judgment. Okay. Let's say they've got the $25,000 in coverage. That insurance company will tender the $25,000. We will start collection activities where we'll try to collect on that judgment, that piece of paper that says they owe you money, and try to collect on either a wage garnishment that'll be hundreds a week, not much, a bank garnishment, which probably they don't have a bank account, or real estate if they have any real estate, and they probably don't if they have that little insurance coverage. What's going to happen is shortly after we start that, or almost immediately, if they've never declared bankruptcy, they're going to go to a bankruptcy attorney, and they're going to say, let's declare bankruptcy on this thing.
And that judgment gets wrapped up into the amount of debt that they're bankrupting, and it goes away basically, right?
It goes away.
They get shielded.
Yeah, there's two bankruptcy plans, and I know only the brief part of it.
Sure.
But the Chapter 7 is, hey, take everything I've got, which is very little, and distribute it to my creditors. In that case, boom, it goes away like it's dust. Chapter 13, if they had a reorganization plan and they had something they could actually pay you, sure, they'll pay you on that judgment, but they're going to be paying you pennies on the dollar. You're going to be paying $400 or $500 a month. And back to what's the problem with that again? The problem isn't, we're not talking about lottery tickets. We're talking about the fact that you weren't able to work, so now you have extra expenses during that time, or you have maybe you brought somebody in to help you, and now you have an extra $500 a month, in outside expenses that you didn't have before this wreck. That's what we're talking about. That's why we're preaching so much to say, hey, look, you need this beforehand, and also let's get it, right the first time. Little side note back to this virus that you and I haven't talked much about, Jim, and this data is just coming out. But one of the thoughts is, ultimately, when a car wreck happens, we're planning. We got two ways to do it, and we're planning for both really from day one. Which is either one, hopefully we can get everything going and get you guys, settled down the road and keep you out of a lawsuit, or two, we got to plan to go all the way into a lawsuit and have a jury trial. Well, the research right now with the jury trial and the coronavirus is saying again that it's kind of making people a little more skeptical and a little bit more of like, excuse my French, blank happens. Okay. So again, if you're in a motorcycle wreck, what's the lesson you got to learn? Not only do you have to have the right insurance coverage, so we have, enough to go for and make it worthwhile and hopefully compensate you for your damages, but from minute one, we've got to get our act together and plan for it, like we've talked about before, whether it's photographs of scars, the accident scene, using the medical bills, right, using the health insurance, witnesses' testimony.
And you talked about, sometimes there may be a security camera in the area where the accident took place. You might be able to quickly get out there and get the tape, preserved and things like that.
I told you we talked about that one on a previous podcast, but that's worth mentioning again. That was a case that we discovered a Ring.com camera, and that covered that picked up the auto accident. And from that, we tracked down the insurance, and we tracked down the vehicle more correctly than their insurance. And that doubled the client's recovery. And he was on a motorcycle, as a matter of fact. And again, it was all about, doing this stuff kind of right away. So again, let's say people say, I don't want to know if I want to deal with an attorney or anything else. I'll still tell you, pick up the phone. Let's at least, I'll give you the right advice for the first 10 minutes, and it doesn't cost you anything. But then two, document, take everything you've got, document it. I always tell people any kind of accident they have, when they take photographs. Sometimes I'll deal with 20 or 25 texts of messages that are the photographs from the scene, their bruises and everything else. I said, send them to me. Why? Because we use one of those cloud-based systems that I take that, I forward it onto the cloud, and it's now just sitting there for the next 2 or 3 years, but we've got it if we need it.
Well, how many times do you lose a phone, break a phone gets stolen, and all of a sudden all that great evidence that you thought you had is gone?
Right.
That happens fairly often. Now, ideally there are ways to restore it, but if not, you're done.
Right. And that's the thing is, with being on a motorcycle is usually the injuries are worse than average. That's what I've experienced. And actually the worst thing, even before this COVID happened, I kind of felt like we were starting to see a trend where I think, again, people are not buying as much car insurance as they used to. And I understand why. It's expensive.
Right.
And you also, when you go in, and I'm not trying to down insurance agents, but an insurance agent and a personal injury attorney, we have two distinct, separate agendas. As a personal injury attorney, I want you to be prepared for the worst case scenario. You've heard that 1,001 times from me, okay? The insurance agent wants you to walk out of there as cheap as you can, okay, so that you can go down the road and say, hey, I'm only paying $500 every 6 months while your friend's paying $800, so he's doing a better job than basically your friend's agent. So it's an opposing issue. Now, do I want you to go spend, all right, well, let me use myself as an example. I'll use myself as a guinea pig again. I still have $500,000 in insurance coverage across the board, okay? Why don't I increase that, since I talk about this so much? Because I know how much insurance companies will fight when you get to that $500,000 mark. I don't think I need to increase it above that. It's excessive. Could I lower it? Yes, okay? I could probably get by... I preach to everybody at least 100,000 across the board, or 250 or 300,000. Sure, I probably could. The problem is it's not worth the savings for me. Might be for me. I think I've looked at it maybe $400 a year, which is nothing to scoff at. But again, to have an insurance company for $400 a year, to have an insurance company probably fight twice as hard to protect me, I'm going to take it.
Yeah, absolutely, because that's what you're paying them for.
Right.
That's ultimately what this policy does. Is it has somebody out there to fight on your behalf?
I don't know if we've ever covered that part, and it's a good part you just brought up on that people need to realize something. Even if it's the basic minimum amount of insurance, whether it's on a motorcycle or a car, you need to have it, because this is the other problem. Okay, let's say you're at fault for a car wreck, right? And you get sued. You're getting served with a summons. That means you're being sued. You got to file a written answer, right? Yep. Well, an insurance company is not only going to indemnify you for basically any judgment that the other people get against you, up to whatever your policy limits are, but also they're going to hire a defense attorney to represent you basically and try to minimize that and settle that claim within those policy limits or less. Well, again, back to that point is, if you don't have the insurance on your vehicle, either one of them, again, most people can't afford to pay $250 an hour, to hire an attorney. And if you're defending a lawsuit, you're in a defense counsel, and you take that kind of case on, I can guarantee you, you're probably talking a $1,500 to $2,000 retainer up front. And by the time that guy gets done with it, you're probably talking, if he gets you out for $5,000 in legal fees, he's done a pretty damn good job. Yeah. So.
And these things stack up, and it's not worth the little bit of savings you think you have up front. But come back to the price shopping. When you go in there, you think, hey, look, I saved all this money. You're not quite sure what all got cut. And if you're not thinking about it, you've really got to be careful about, did they take money out of that UIM coverage levels to save you money? And if so, you may have done yourself a disservice, because there's no forecasting when that accident's going to happen. It could be on your ride out of that parking lot down the street to Thornton's to get a soda, and it could still happen. And the problem is, you just gave away that coverage. So you've got to shop these things around. You've got to look, but you've got to make sure that when you're switching to a different policy or to a different company and a different policy through that company, that it's apples to apples, because anybody can throw a price. Anybody can take something out, offer you less, and charge less for it. But you've got to be really, really careful about what coverages got changed, reduced, or in some cases eliminated.
Well, and on that issue, it's funny, I was going to talk about this later, but I'm going to bring it up now. You know, it's funny because a friend of mine and we talked, he trusts me a lot, and he just purchased a new vehicle, and he was saying again at the same time he switched insurance companies, and he was really pleased with his savings. And I said, okay, but let me look at your policy. And they did exactly what you just mentioned, which is, you know, I tell people to make it easy on yourself because, well, and I'll come back to how to explain a policy in a second, but on his case, they sold him $100,000 of liability coverage, which meant great. If he was at fault for a wreck or he hit a Mercedes, you know, something huge, he was going to be covered. He was going to be protected. He only had $25,000 of uninsured and underinsured coverage. So what they were doing again was, okay, if he's not at fault for it and he gets hit by somebody who doesn't have enough insurance or no insurance, he's limited to just $25,000, and that's the problem. So again, I said to him, go back and see what the cost would be to have $100,000 across the board, because again, I don't think it's going to be that much more expensive. You know, that's this. We have talked about this on a previous podcast, but it's worth repeating on something. When you look at that insurance policy, because they send you you sign up with State Farm, okay? And excuse me, I'm losing my voice. They send you this 50-page policy. 2 or 3 pages in, they have what you call a declarations page, which is this page with all these numbers on it. And they usually will have, let's say they'll have a number that says 50,000, then a slash 100,000, or 100,000 slash 300,000. That first number is the maximum any one person can recover. That second number is no matter how many people are injured in that accident, that's all they're going to pay out. Well, the thing for you as a consumer to realize is, okay, but you see bodily injury or bodily liability. Sounds like you're protected, you know, up to that. It's not. That means when you're at fault, you're protected up to that. So back to that attorney being hired to defend you from a lawsuit, that's what they're saying. When you're at fault, that's where that coverage comes into play. The 3 that protect you if you're in a car, and I'm going to give a little caveat to motorcycles in a second, is uninsured and underinsured coverage. The uninsured, the guy has no insurance. Your company acts like they insure him. Underinsured, he doesn't have enough. Again, we can recover with hopefully the maximum from the tortfeasor, and then we go against your policy to recover more. And the third one is the no-fault or PIP coverage. Standard in Kentucky is $10,000. Okay, you can buy optional. In Indiana, by the way, it's not automatic. It's typically referred to as MedPay. Yes, you can buy $10,000 in MedPay. It has a very similar type concept. Motorcycles, the problem is, again, those first 2 exist. The no-fault coverage does not automatically, and that you got to buy that. And that's where I will tell most motorcyclists I won't recommend they buy the no-fault or PIP coverage. It's just too expensive on a motorcycle. But again, they need to be willing to take that $10,000 penalty hit on their medical bills, and they need to have health insurance to cover their medical bills. So, you know, but those are the 3 that, yes. And the reason we preach about this is, you know, I remember we talked about this again on a prior podcast. You know, there is no such thing as full coverage from a legal standpoint. It doesn't mean anything.
That surprises so many people because everybody says that. I mean, if they think they have it, they're going to say, yeah, I've got full coverage. And to your point, it doesn't really exist.
Right. Well, and my friend, you know, probably would have walked out of that, and that agent might have used that term and said, hey, I gave you full coverage. Why? Because you have a little bit of every different type of insurance, which is great, except for the fact that's not really what you need, okay? And the reason you need more is because we have too many people who don't have any insurance or not enough insurance, you know, and they're driving the roadway. And with this COVID going on and all of us taking a financial hit, because we all have in one fashion or another, okay, even personal injury attorneys, okay, the business has slowed down. That is all the more that you've got to protect yourself, whether it's on a motorcycle, a scooter, an automobile. You've got to protect yourself on that.
What do they mean when they say, I mean, it's slick marketing. It's really just slick marketing, but what do they mean when they say full coverage? What are they trying to tell the client? Does that come back to the...
To me, I don't know if I can even answer what they think, because to me, I always hear people refer to it and they think that they're covering the car, which is great. That's collision coverage.
Right.
Collision coverage covers your car. If you hit a pole and it's your fault, it doesn't matter. Comprehensive on your car is, okay, the car burns up or gets stolen. Those are the 2. And that's what I usually see it and see it referred to. So it's a term that I've never really completely comprehended what they're trying to get at.
And the problem with that is that's usually fair market value. It's not usually replacement cost. So if I have a brand new car, Okay, it doesn't mean once I've driven it off the lot, obviously there's some depreciation. If I've driven it for a couple of months, there's a little bit more depreciation. And I get in a wreck, and I think my coverage, no, fair market value. It's still not what I paid the day I signed at the car lot.
Right, whether it's the other person's insurance or whether, and use the context, and I should come back to a motorcycle example here in a second. Whether it's the other person's insurance or whether or not it is your own insurance, it's fair market value, what that car would allegedly or the motorcycle sold for the day before the accident.
Yeah.
So again, and that's back to the issue of you've been in a wreck, it wasn't your fault, and immediately you're starting off, a couple steps below ground because, it's that situation. On the motorcycle, I just thought about that I had one client who had a very special custom paint job on his Harley Davidson, and we went through. Oh, I need to check with him on that and see where it stands now because I was just helping him out more so because it was property damage only. But we had to go convince them what that paint job was worth and why the motorcycle was worth more than average and that type of thing. Yep. And again, it's one of those that. You've got 3 claims when a car wreck or motorcycle wreck happens. You've got your property damage, you got your medical bills, and you got your pain and suffering. And so, again, from minute one, you kind of have to make sure you're planning for all 3 claims and that you're also making those claims align. Because if they don't, it can be a real issue. So.
Well, and that's the thing. Let's assume you had already paid off your car, and now you get fair market value. You've got to go buy a new car. And now suddenly, even for an accident that wasn't your fault, you now have a car payment where you wouldn't have had one before. And again, the law endeavors to be fair, but it's not.
Right.
And that's the thing.
And then that's where, and I think we'll close on this because and such, that's where I'll tell you again, all right, my cell is 502-609-7657. Pick up the phone and talk to me and let me see if I can help you. Because again, I won't do a car damage or motorcycle damage only claim, okay? But I will take 10 minutes to give you some advice, give you some guidance as to what your rights are. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's again, because you've got to get on the right track to begin with. And especially with a motorcycle accident, because to me, they are much more complicated than the average car wreck.
I would think so. Hey, Jim Desmond, I appreciate your time. Thanks for everything. Friends, I hope you found this helpful. I hope you found this interesting. By all means, if you have an issue out there, you have questions, pick up the phone and give Jim a call. He's been doing this for a long time. In fact, in July, he's getting ready to celebrate his 15th anniversary. So, Jim, an early congratulations to you, my friend.
Thank you. Actually, 15 years, the law firm.
Yeah,
being
your
solo.
own law firm.
I've been practicing law longer than that. I hate to admit it. So.
But out there on your own, almost 15 years now. So, again, congratulations, especially in this environment. It's a tough way to earn a living.
Appreciate it very much.
Man, I'm proud of you. So, hey, all the best. Again, my friends, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again in about 2 weeks. Bye-bye. That's it for this episode of the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Jim Desmond will be back in 2 weeks to provide information you need to know related to car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. Until then, check out AttorneyDesmond.com. You can also follow him on Facebook at Attorney James Desmond. Drive safely, and please remember to buckle up.